Big changes might be coming for international students in the United States. Hi, I'm Jim Hacking, immigration lawyer practicing law throughout the United States, out of our offices in St. Louis, San Diego, Washington, D.C., and Chicago, Illinois. What happens if the Department of Homeland Security does away with duration of status? We're going to talk about that in this video. We're going to talk about the problem that DHS sees, what they're trying to fix, what we think is really going on, and what it means for international students and those who love them. In order to set the stage, let's talk about what duration of status is. So unlike many visas in the United States, people that come on either an F1 status, F2 status, J1 or J2, they are allowed to stay in the United States for as long as they maintain their status. Everybody else, like visit visas, business visas, they all have an end date when they have to leave the United States. But there are special rules for international students who come here on the F1 program or the J1 program. And what that means is that historically, these international students have been allowed to stay as long as they keep going to school, keep maintaining their status by not committing any crimes, and by working towards a degree. If you were an F1 student, as long as you maintained your I-20, or if you were an international student here on a J visa, as long as you maintained your DS 2019 and the expiration date, and were fulfilling the requirements of those visas, you could stay in the United States for many, many years. Remember, the visa itself in your passport is just the ticket into the United States. So once you get to the United States, as long as you're visiting with your international student office, making sure that your paperwork is updated, you could stay here for a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, you could work in between. There are many, many ways you could stay in the United States for years and years under the F1 and J1 programs. And this is really a good thing. It cut down on paperwork, it allowed students to have a lot of flexibility, and most importantly, it allowed them to concentrate on their studies and not have to worry about harsh immigration deadlines. The ease in which international students could come to the United States and stay and study, get a little bit of work experience, and maybe get sponsorship for a job really allowed the United States to stand out from countries like Canada or in Europe, in that we allowed people to stay here for a really long time and to really build a career here in the United States. Let's talk about why that matters, why it is good for the United States to have international students here with us. I'd like to read you a statistic. In 2023 to 2024, international students contributed $43.8 billion to the U.S. economy and supported 378,000 jobs across housing, dining, retail, transportation, and more. In addition, every 150 additional international graduates leads to about one new startup within 5 years. Nearly 25% of billion-dollar startups in the United States were founded or co-founded by former international students, each creating an average of 800 jobs. These students stay in the United States. They build companies. They help American workers find jobs. They are a great contributor to the success of this country. And that's beyond the economic impact students have while going to school as international students. The fact is, international students pay the highest tuition rates in the country, and it is them who supports the in-state tuition and the lower fees that some students get as American citizens because they were from that state or because that university really wanted them. In many ways, international students subsidize American-born students and support these institutions of higher learning. And of course, we know the Trump administration has declared war on universities and colleges and is actively supporting the dumbing down of America. They don't want these international students coming to the United States. They don't want them here competing with American students for jobs. They view international students as a bad thing, as a negative, as something that is hurting American students' chances of finding a job and competing in the international community. So really, it was duration of status and the fact that we allowed these international students to come here, to stay here, to make connections, to build businesses, to hire workers, to grow empires that really benefited the United States. But that's not what the Department of Homeland Security views them as now. All they're talking about is security, crime, and trying to highlight all the alleged negative factors of having high immigration rates in the United States. And what better way to do that than to target the very universities that they disdain, that they hate, that they don't want people to look up to or to fight back against these draconian changes that the United States government is currently putting into place. And that brings us to the new rule change. The Department of Homeland Security wants to do away with duration of status. They want to end that program. They want people to have fixed deadlines on leaving the United States, and they want to make it much harder for international students to stay here for very long. Let's take a look. So F and J students would be admitted only for 4 years at a max. To stay beyond that, they would have to file forms with USCIS, pay additional fees, and undergo biometrics and background checks every time. In addition, the grace period that international students have to leave the United States would be cut from 60 days to 30 days, therefore in half. The new proposed rule would also make it much harder for graduate students to change course midstream. They would have to start a new program or leave the United States. Another key change is that people would only be able to come to the United States to study English before transferring to a university or community college or college after 24 months. So you would only be able to stay here and study the English language for 2 years. And we have many international students who come here. They sometimes take a little bit longer, but this new rule would cap that at 24 months. And one of the biggest changes is that those dependents, the spouses and children of F1 visa holders or J1 visa holders, their stay, their authorized ability to be in the United States would be capped at the exact schedule of their spouses. So they're really going to crack down on any overlaps. They want to make sure that any spouses or derivative beneficiaries stick to the same schedule as the primary F1 or J1 visa holder, and to make it much harder for those people who come as derivatives. Why is DHS doing this? Well, of course, they think that everybody involved in any kind of immigration benefit is committing fraud. They think every immigrant is lying to them. They believe that having these new rules will allow them to check in on international students more often and to make sure that the international students are working towards a degree and getting ready to leave the United States. Remember, they want to stop legal immigration to the United States, and they know that many internationals come to the United States on F1s and J1 visas, and they don't want that. They don't want immigration to the United States, and they want to cut back on the ability of people to come to the United States, and what better way to do that than to target international students? They throw around phrases like national security, they invoke 9/11, and they point out the fact that some of those terrorists who committed those heinous acts on September 11th were international students to justify these changes some 24 years later. Why does this matter? What's the big deal? Well, international students are going to have to pay a lot more money. They're going to have to worry about their status. USCIS is notoriously slow on changes of status or extensions of status, so we can only guess that USCIS will spend much time and delay in processing these applications, thereby putting these students into limbo. They're not going to be able to continue their studies. Universities are not going to be able to know if their international students are going to be able to continue in a meaningful way at those colleges and universities. And of course, that's part of the plan. And the biggest reason why this is important is because they want to shift the power over international students from the designated school officers at universities. Every school has an international student advisor called the DSO, and they are the ones who maintain the records related to whether the student is keeping in status. And the Department of Homeland Security wants to shift that back to USCIS to give them the power over people's immigration status and to make it much harder to stay in the United States long term. Let's look at some practical examples, ways this is going to really affect international students here in the United States. One easy hypothetical are PhD students. PhD students take a long time to get their qualifications in order, to get their theses done, and if someone is in the middle of that and their status runs out, they're going to have to apply and go through this new paperwork and all the headaches that USCIS will drop on them. You might have an international student in their master's program. Let's say they're studying English and they decide they want to study engineering. They're either going to have to leave the United States or start all over, or not be able to do it at all. We also need to think about these J1 researchers. The United States as a research hub, at least before Robert Kennedy came in and blew up the Department of Health and Human Services and took away all those grants. But the United States has always been a beacon of hope for people wanting to do cutting edge research. And I can imagine situations where these J1 students come to the United States, they're doing work saving people from breast cancer or any kind of diseases, and the United States says, well, you've hit your 4-year deadline, so you need to go, right in the middle of their research. That's going to make it very unattractive for internationals to come to the United States. They are already not coming. They are already going to Europe and Canada to find places where they can safely do their research. And who's going to lose out? All the people that would benefit from that research, all because Donald Trump and Stephen Miller don't like immigrants. And we need to remember, this is just another example of the Trump administration's attacks on international students since they came back into power in January of 2025. Remember, they famously revoked a number of international students' visas without any kind of due process just because they had shown up in a database. The Trump administration unilaterally terminated their SEVIS records, which meant that these international students thought they had to leave the United States. Many did. They thought that they had to drop out of school. They were told that by their schools because of of the information they were getting from the Department of Homeland Security. USCIS and the State Department are scrutinizing people's SEVIS records. They're also tracking whether or not people are engaged in speech that the U.S. government doesn't like, maybe critical of Donald Trump or critical of Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government. This is an overall pattern of the United States current government attacking international students, and this piece of cracking down on F1s and J1s being able to stay here for as long as they need to is just one more example of the administration's hostility towards immigrants. So this new rule was proposed in August of 2025, and people have until October 28th, 2025 to make a comment on this proposed rule change. It's a big rule change, and it's something that everybody needs to take seriously. There are so many benefits of having international students in the United States. Like I said, they're subsidizing university students who were born in the United States. They're doing cutting edge research that they're going to have to abandon. They're going to have to leave the United States, and it's going to make it much less attractive for them to even come here in the first place. And of course, that's part of the plan. We'll put a link down below where you can leave a comment on the Federal Register, and I ask that you please do. If you care about immigrants, if you care about international students, please go to the Federal Register and leave a comment. Courts do look at those in the future. So this is your opportunity to do something small to try to help immigrants. So if this rule comes into effect, yes, international students will still be able to come here, but it's going to be much more of a hassle, much harder for them, much harder to stay here long term. There's going to be very little certainty as to whether their long-term immigration prospects are good, whether they should invest all their hard work in working on research projects and doing all the great things that international students do, coming here, starting businesses, employing many Americans, getting patents, growing companies, really helping contribute to the American economy. This is just another dark curtain from the Trump administration around our borders trying to keep immigrants out, and it's really going to have a negative effect on the United States in the long term if this rule is allowed to go into effect. Congress, of course, could change it if they want to. DHS may change it based on notice and comment. I doubt that severely. It's really going to be up to Congress or a new Congress to try to undo these horrible changes that the Trump administration's engaged in. If you're an international student and you're looking for help, either having to fill out this new paperwork or adjusting your status to that of lawful permanent resident, we'd love to work with you. We are Hacking Immigration Law, one of the best immigration law firms in the country, and you can reach us at 314-961-8200. Email us info@hackingimmigrationlaw.com. If you're just looking for free resources, we have a ton of them. We have our Immigration Answer Show. That's a show that I do 3 or 4 times a week. It's on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook group, which is called Immigrant Home. You can find us there 3 or 4 times a week. That's just me answering questions for 60 to 90 minutes from immigrants, trying to answer all of their immigration concerns and worries. Sometimes we call it immigration therapy. People really get a lot out of that show. You also can follow us on TikTok at Immigration Hacking. We'd love to have you follow us there. And then finally, I mentioned the Immigrant Home Facebook group. Make sure you join us there and that you subscribe to the YouTube channel so that whenever we make new videos, if you turn on your alerts, you'll find out and you'll be able to see these new videos. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.